Well, no doubt this is a monumental mission. Before Amelia Earhart's fateful flight, her plane was housed right here at the Purdue Airport. Now they want to identify it and bring it home.
And thank you very much for being here today. My name's Steve Schultz. I'm the Senior Vice President and General Counsel for Purdue University. I also serve as General Counsel for Purdue Research Foundation. Along with our collaborator, Dr. Richard Pettigrew of the Archaeological Legacy Institute, we are here to announce today a new chapter in the story of one of our most legendary Boilermakers and one of the most groundbreaking, certainly one of the most courageous pioneers in American history. It's that of our own Amelia Earhart, the namesake of the new airport terminal that's being constructed just feet away, and whose archives we have the honor to maintain as an institution. This is the story of a legacy. It's the story of a mystery. Through the action we announce today, we hope it will ultimately be the story of discovery, and even perhaps one day the story of a special homecoming. We're pleased to announce on this, the 88th anniversary of her disappearance, that Purdue Research Foundation and the Archaeological Legacy Institute have joined in the effort to locate Amelia Earhart's lost aircraft and help bring closure to the historic journey they began almost a century ago. The expedition will go to the Pacific island of Niku in November 2025 to confirm whether a visual anomaly known as the Turaya object, seen in satellite and other imagery in the island's lagoon, is what remains of Earhart's specially designed Lockheed 10E Electra aircraft. Niku is an island in the Republic of Kiribati, located approximately halfway between Australia and Hawaii. It also lies approximately 400 miles south by southeast of tiny Howland Island, which was the planned destination of Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, on the second to last leg of their 1937 attempt to circumnavigate the globe around the equator. It was actually the fateful leg, as it turned out. If we are successful in identifying the Turaya object as the lost Electra, we will have solved perhaps the greatest mystery of the 20th century and potentially create conditions for returning the Electra, or what remains of the Electra, to Purdue, which would fulfill the wishes of Amelia Earhart and her husband and manager, George Putnam, expressed at the time. During my 12 and a half years as general counsel, Purdue and PRF have been contacted several times with claims that the Electra may have been found. However, in my estimation, none has presented a circumstantial case as strong and convincing as this one. No other case, for example, offers as evidence directional bearings from Amelia's radio signals captured at the time by the U.S. Navy, Coast Guard, and Pan American Airways, all of which converge on the general vicinity of Niku. A statement by Amelia in her final in-flight radio transmission, one of the few that was able to be heard and understood, in which she was heard saying, quote, "We are on the line 157-337, indicating a flight path that coincides with the longitudinal line of position leading from Howland Island in the precise direction of Niku. Shortwave radio communications in which Amelia's voice was heard on the U.S. mainland in the days following her disappearance. Something that could only have happened, by the way, if a plane had landed safely on land and thus allow her and Noonan to operate the radio through the use of the starboard engine continuing to operate for several days. Next, a 2017 analysis of human bones discovered on the island in 1940, which determined that Amelia's bone lengths were more similar to the discovered bones than 99% of individuals in a large reference sample, strongly supporting the conclusion that they belonged to Amelia. In addition, artifacts found on the island, including a woman's shoe, a compact case, a freckle cream jar, a medicine vial, all dating to the 1930s. The medicine vial is particularly fascinating, in my opinion. The type on its cap, it's a glass vial with a cap. Most of the type is scratched away, but what remains is UCA Pharmacy. Earhart lived in the days before her flight from California in Toluca Lakes, just outside Los Angeles. Next, the so-called Bevington object, a photographic anomaly that was captured just 3 months after the plane's disappearance in 1937, which appears to represent or be consistent with one of the Electra's landing gear, and captured in that photo on the Nikumuroro Reef. Finally, the Turaya object itself, first noticed in satellite images in 2020, later confirmed to be visible in other images captured as early as 2015, just following the tropical cyclone Pam, one of the most devastating tropical storms in that area in the last few decades. That storm is believed to have washed the sediment off the buried wreckage, thus making it first visible in 2015. Importantly, the object appears to have been in the same place in the lagoon since at least 1938, based on aerial photographs that were taken at that time in the late 1930s. This theory, called the Nikumuroro hypothesis, has been built since the late 1980s by an organization known as the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery. Dr. Pettigrew, and now Purdue, is following the work established by Tiger, as it's called, since that time. As Dr. Pettigrew can explain, each of these pieces of evidence is fascinating in its own right, but collectively they are, I mean, if you were to ask me, in my estimation as an attorney, collectively they are an extremely persuasive circumstantial case that Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan landed on the island and were marooned there. However, no smoking gun has been found to date. The purpose of this expedition is to see if the Turaya object is indeed the lost Electra. That would be the smoking gun, and the case would be closed. Dr. Pettigrew will cover the background and plans for the project in a moment, but first a word about Amelia's legacy story. Her career here is well chronicled, and time doesn't permit a full description of her importance to Purdue history. But John Norberg is here, and he's a biography, and if you want to catch him, he can tell you all about it. Let's just say it was a match made in heaven when Amelia met Purdue President Edward Elliott at a conference at the Waldorf Astoria in September 1934. She was, of course, already famous by then, having been the first woman to fly across the Atlantic as a passenger in 1928, shortly after Charles Lindbergh accomplished the first solo flight across the Atlantic. And then 4 years later, in 1932, the first woman to herself fly solo across the Atlantic, returning each time to ticker tape parades and becoming world famous in the process. Now, there were other notable speakers at this event at the Waldorf Astoria, including Eleanor Roosevelt and Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia. A lot of us associate that name with aviation, flying into New York, right? But Amelia and President Elliott, in particular, found common cause in the themes of their remarks. For his part, President Elliott spoke about the importance of the younger generation, especially women, in launching careers that would help the United States emerge from the Great Depression. Turns out that Amelia had a similar message, advocating strongly that women should have equal pathways to professional fields that were historically, at that point, dominated by men. That included, by the way, careers as pilots. Then, in an innovation that I would say is very characteristic of Purdue, President Elliott fashioned a special faculty position involving 2 points of focus. One, she would provide career counseling and coaching to women students, inspiring them to finish their degree and pursue a career outside the home. She would also serve as chief consultant to Purdue's then-fledgling aeronautical engineering program, which would, of course, soon develop a world-class reputation of its own and eventually attract other brave aviators, including Neil Armstrong and our other astronauts, leading to Purdue's nickname as the Cradle of Astronauts. Meanwhile, in accordance with President Elliott's vision, Amelia would be able to continue her flying career and have full access to this airport, which at that point was still fairly new, built in 1930, making Purdue the first university in the country to have its own airport. She would have been walking through these halls and in these hangars quite a bit. The announcement of her coming to Purdue, by the way, worked almost automatically. It prompted a 50% increase in enrollment in first-year women students before she even set foot on campus. Of course, that was probably aided by, even then, her continuing growing fame, because in January of 1935, she came to Purdue in June of that year. That January, she became the first person, man or woman, to fly solo from Hawaii to California, thus proving that leg across crossing the difficult expanse of the Pacific could be done. With President Elliott's encouragement, the other prong of Earhart's charge as a faculty member at Purdue, spearheading the aeronautical engineering program, was soon aided by Purdue Research Foundation's establishment of the Amelia Earhart Fund in Aeronautical Research. Through that vehicle, just over $40,000 were raised to fund the development of a specialized aircraft that would be designed for around-the-world flight. That goal was still very much in the forefront of Amelia Earhart's mind and that of her husband and manager, George Putnam. But the specific interest behind the effort was in studying the effects of the human body on long-range flight. Amelia and George Putnam, along with their team, then worked with Purdue Research Foundation and Lockheed to develop the 10E Electra aircraft. It was essentially a flying gas tank because it had to carry many gallons of gasoline to enable the coverage of those long expanses, certainly from different points in the globe, but especially across the Pacific. Both George and Amelia had clear intentions of returning the plane to Purdue at the conclusion of the historic flight. As George wrote to President Elliott in September 1936, this is kind of fun to think about. Note the reference to his futuristic year that he had in mind. The more I think about the project we discussed, the more enthusiastic I am. I would love to see it become the nucleus of a magnificent transportation exhibit at Purdue. How interesting for the engineers of 1975 to have before them an example such as this Lockheed of what flyers today were using in plane, instrument, engine, and equipment. Incidentally, should our project take form, I would suggest supplementing the plane itself with a fine exhibit of trophies of Amelia Earhart's major flights, charts, photographs, records, and personal equipment. This might become the foundation of an exhibit paralleling in world interest the Lindbergh collection at St. Louis. Amelia herself, at about the same time, a couple months later, wrote to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, acknowledging Purdue's contributions to her effort and aspiration. She said, "The operation of my flying laboratory," which it had come to be known, "is under the auspices of Purdue University." And this is what is very Amelia Earhart and why her legacy is so important. Like previous flights, I'm taking on this one solely because I want to, and because I feel that women now and then have to do things to show what women can do. Very Amelia. We believe we owe it to her legacy to follow the evidence where it leads, and that's why we're supporting and joining Dr. Richard Pettigrew and the Archaeological Legacy Institute on this expedition to Nikamororo. Now I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Pettigrew, president of ALI, who is the principal investigator in this project. Rick is an established consulting archaeologist based in Eugene, Oregon, with 5 decades of archaeological experience, principally focused on Western North America. He received his undergraduate degree at Stanford, where he played football, happened to be in the same backfield as Jim Plunkett, and received his MA and PhD degrees from the University of Oregon. 25 years ago, he founded ALI, a nonprofit corporation and media company that is focused on the work of telling the human story. Together, we look forward to telling this story. Rick?
All right, thanks very much, Steve. First of all, I'm very, very honored and very grateful to be here, to be invited to be here among you. just a few short months ago, this would have been considered fantasy. And I'm very grateful to Steve also for the time that he spent with me. We've gotten to know each other pretty well over the past several months working on this project. And incidentally, I just want to point out that my physical appearance here is because I'm a cancer survivor. I just underwent my third reconstructive surgery on my jaw. All right. Nevertheless, I'm in very good shape physically otherwise. And very happy to have survived that and have an opportunity to be here with you and do what we're doing right now. What I'm going to do is run through some slides. I've been involved with work on Nikomororo for some time. For a long time, indirectly, through my friend Tom King, who was the archaeologist for Tiger, who had done excavation at a site known as the Seven Site on Nikomororo. And I followed his work there, and then eventually had an opportunity in 2017 to be on the island with them doing research, archaeological research. And I was fascinated by that. And one thing led to another, and here we are. The Turaya object was first noticed in satellite imagery in 2020, and then we followed up with getting more satellite images. What I'm going to do here is walk through some slides here with you. The first one is up. And I'm not going to go into great detail about the evidence for the Turaya object because that's all been laid out for you in the media kit, including the video that we produced about it, our webpage about it, lots of detail which is too numerous, too abundant to really run through here in the short time that we have. So I encourage you to take a look at that because I'm going to be referring to that as I go through this. Now, to review, this is the path that Amelia was following in 1937 on the world flight. The object was to circle the globe, basically around the equator at its widest. This had not been done before by anybody, man or woman. She successfully reached Ley New Guinea, and on her next leg was attempting to reach tiny Howland Island, which is only about a mile square in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. This shows her flight path here. As she was approaching Howland Island, she was trying to communicate with the Coast Guard ship Itasca, which was stationed right there off Howland Island. They recorded a number of radio transmissions from her, which are summarized here. Most important piece, Steve already mentioned, the line of position, 157-337. After that, contact with her was lost, and a search was put together by the military, not just the U.S. military, by others as well, including the British and even the Japanese. Since that disappearance, which was famous for obvious reasons, somebody who's been in several ticker tape parades, who's being followed by 1 billion people around the world, is going to make news when she disappears. And there's been a lot of media, a lot of books, movies, TV shows, etc. about it. This is just a sample here. Now, getting back to the case, this is the line of position that we were referring to, which runs through Howland Island, and if you follow it southward, goes to Nikomororo. Howland Island is a very, very small island, very difficult to see, especially if it has one little cloud on top of it. So it's no surprise that Amelia was unable to see it. We don't actually know whether her flight path took her directly to Howland or if she was off course a little bit. We don't really know for a fact. But we do suspect that she would have followed this line of position southward because that's the direction in which there are other islands. If you go north on that, you keep going until you get to Kamchatka. There's no way that they were going to find any land in that direction. Something about Nikomororo. Nikomororo has a rather short history, but we do have some evidence of prehistoric occupation on the island. When I was there in 2017, for example, we found what appeared to be a prehistoric cemetery with graves in a Polynesian kind of form. We don't really know anything more about that. We haven't been able to date it or identify what those graves are. But then in the 1890s, a British gentleman made an attempt at a coconut plantation, just about 3 years. Then in 1929, the freighter SS Norwich City was lifted up onto the reef by a huge storm. And that wreck remains a landmark on the island today. Then in 1938, the British made an attempt to colonize several islands in the Phoenix Island group, including Nicomaroro. That lasted for about 25 years. They brought in people from other places in the Pacific, other indigenous groups, including the Gilbert Islands and the Solomon Islands. And this is a picture of the colonists on Nicomaroro. I'm not sure what date this is, but it's during that period. Now here we have Nicomaroro Island. So I'm going to be pointing out some features of the island as we go. But most importantly, look on the west side of the island. You can see that there's a connection between the lagoon and the ocean. We call this the passage between them, the Tasman Passage. And then directly opposite the passage is a peninsula called the Turaya Peninsula, which projects from north to south into the lagoon. Now, I'm going to show you exactly where this island is located. We put together, and where the object is located, and we put together this little animation. There's Nicomaroro, and then continuing, there's the Turaya Peninsula, the little sand spit that projects westward from the peninsula, and then the Turaya object. This image is the first image that we saw. We were made aware of it in 2020, but it turns out that it was actually shot in, I believe, August of 2016. And here's a close-up of this. Again, it shows the location of the Tasman Passage, which connects the lagoon to the ocean. And then directly opposite that is the Turaya Peninsula and the little sand spit that's attached to it at the southern end. You may notice the delta-like sediment deposit, which is in the lagoon, created by the daily movement of water from the ocean into the lagoon. Every time the tide rises, water rushes into the lagoon. When the tide ebbs, water goes out of the lagoon. In the process, it's created these landforms that you see here. As an archaeologist, I recognize these landforms. I can understand the processes that created them, and that relates to what we're talking about in terms of how to interpret the Turaya object. Nicomaroro is a really, really beautiful place. I was happy to be there in 2017. I had a drone with me, and I took this picture just to give you an idea of what it looks like, the beautiful colors and so forth. It's a classic coral atoll island. It sits on top of an ancient volcano, which was eroded away, and then coral grew on top of it, and eventually formed this ring of land and the lagoon. Now, coming back to the Turaya object. Again, this is the original image that we became familiar with starting in 2020. I played with this quite a bit as I was analyzing it. This is a photoshopped modification of that to try to bring out the contrast. I analyzed this a lot, but very quickly after that, I put together a group of supporters to buy another 24 or so satellite images. The object was to find out when this picture was taken and if there are other pictures of the object which could tell us more about it. And we learned quite a bit from those pictures. Here is the Electra. Of course, here's the Electra over here too. So I think we all know what that looks like. All right, so one of the first things I did was try to compare the Electra aircraft to the Turaya object. And I did a lot of measurements. It turns out that the size of the Turaya object matches perfectly with the size of the Electra in every dimension that we could find. So I did this series of images to try to compare the two visually. My interpretation, this is a hypothesis, is that the largest piece there, which I call Part A, is a fragment, a representation, or a part of the fuselage. And then part B, just above it, is part of the tail. And then there's a projection just below it, part C, which could be part of the spar that the wing was attached to. That's the hypothesis. Okay, I told you we gathered together satellite images. Now, in our media kit, we have all those pictures, but what we did beyond that was to put all the pictures together, all the satellite images, or at least most of them, into a sequence and an animation video, and scaled them appropriately and positioned the object in the precise same spot so that you can see many different pictures of the same object over a period of time. I think that animation gives us a better mental concept of what we're looking at. And you'll see in the upper left, you'll see the dates of these images. This first image, this is the first image of the object chronologically, was taken in April of 2015. So as we go through this, and I think we'll go through it a couple of times because the first time is kind of a blur, at least I think for most people. Then we'll go through it again, and you'll maybe get a better idea of what it is we're looking at. So starting in 2015, I'm going to run this animation, then we'll go back. The images are all different. The resolutions are different from picture to picture for various reasons. We're looking at something from space. So, and how it looks will vary depending upon the level of the tide, the clarity of the water, the actual resolution of the photography. But we put all these together. You can see as we progress through that we see an actual object initially, then it becomes more obscured, which in my interpretation is a result of sedimentation around the object, and eventually it becomes covered, so that in the last image what we're looking at is not the actual object itself, but the impression of the object covered by sediment in the lagoon bottom. It's very, very close to the sand spit that's attached to the southern end of the Chiraya Peninsula. In fact, it's so very close that I can imagine you could just jump from the shore and be right on top of it. It's very, very close. And we're lucky with that because that means that when we're actually on the island and investigating, we'll be able to do a land-based investigation of an object that is in the water, very shallow water, as you can see. I'm estimating that the object is somewhere between 2 and 5 meters below the water surface. The tide rises and falls about 1.4 meters every day. So the depth of the water is variable. All right, so let's try to walk through that. Let's go through the video again one more time. Oh, let's go back. Okay, let's walk through that again. I'll try it from here. No, not working. Can you play that from there? Go ahead. Yeah. So again, it looks a little bit different each time, but when you put all these images together, you come to, I think, a better concept of what it is we're looking at. It has all the same parts, and in many cases, all those parts are visible. In some cases, especially later in time, some of them become obscured. Again, I believe that's because of sedimentation, which is ongoing at that spot. As we've said, the idea is that a storm in March of 2015 uncovered the object and made it visible from above. We've done research on that, and indeed, there was a huge storm, Tropical Cyclone Pam, which was the most powerful storm recorded in the South Pacific in recorded history. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. All right, now stepping back a little bit, there's been a lot of research done on Nicomaroro, primarily by TIGER, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, which is headed by Rick Gillespie. I admire them a great deal. They've been working on this island and this hypothesis since 1989. Over that course of time, they've gathered a lot of evidence. Some of that is summarized here. And this picture is designed to show evidence for aircraft on the island. And it comes from different sources. Some of it is testimony by the colonists who were there. TIGER has interviewed a number of them. And they have reported that there were pieces of an airplane and that they knew about an airplane that had been on the island before they arrived in 1938. In fact, during the course of time they were there, they actually collected aircraft aluminum, which we can't prove is from the Electra. Nevertheless, many, many pieces of aircraft aluminum have been recovered from the island, from the village where the colonists lived, and some pieces were used to make artifacts, or objects such as combs, for example. You'll see the shipwreck there. That's the Norwich City shipwreck. And then there are references to airplane parts that have been found, or rather reported, especially out on the reef. In 2001 or 2002, someone visiting the island saw what looked like an airplane wheel in the passage. The colonists have also referred to pieces of an airplane that they said came from right next to the Chiraya Peninsula. Okay, and then also in 1999, a tank that came off the Norwich City shipwreck apparently had floated into the lagoon and came to rest on the beach on the lagoon shore. So we do have evidence of airplane parts being recovered and noticed on the island. So what I want to go through now is just how could the aircraft have been moved into the lagoon to become the Chiraya object? All right, so the idea is that Amelia and Fred landed on the Northwest Reef. By the way, that's not a crash landing. You sometimes hear people refer to it as a crash landing. No, we're not talking about a crash landing. We're talking about a successful landing on the reef with an intact aircraft. I think it's likely that Amelia was planning to be rescued, refueled, take off again, and make it to Hawaii and continue on to California to complete her journey. That was her hope. And for a period of maybe 5 days, that hope remained alive. But then eventually the tide, which rose higher each day, floated the airplane up and off its landing place. And in this concept, the airplane would have then rolled and crashed up against the reef as a consequence of the surf, would have broken up. The outer wings would come off first, then the engines, the landing gear, most of the wing parts would come off. And remember, it was full of empty gas tanks, so it would be very buoyant. These were big tanks. In fact, Amelia had to crawl over the fuel tanks in order to get back to talk with Fred, her navigator. So it would have been very buoyant. The concept is that all these pieces came off, especially the heaviest pieces, the engines, of course. And then, as the tide rose, water flowed into the lagoon, carrying this floating fuselage and tail, which would have been pushed across the lagoon to the opposite shore, ultimately ending up where it is now. Now, how do we know that this, well, and then what happened that made it visible? We're talking about Tropical Cyclone Pam. Very interesting that we have images of the island from February of 2015 and April of 2015. Take a look at the western shore of the island. The consequences of the storm surge are very evident. Much of the vegetation has been swept away. By April, it was definitely storm ravaged. We know that there's a lot of documentation for Tropical Cyclone Pam. The storm track was actually 1,000 kilometers, 600 miles to the west of Nicaragua, but it had a huge storm surge, which had effects all over that part of the Pacific, and obviously including Nicaragua Island. So the idea is that the storm surge passed through the passage in the lagoon, and the current flowed across the lagoon, creating a vortex, and the velocity of the water was such that it lifted the sediment off the object and made it visible from the air. All right, so here we are back in the lagoon. Take a look at the sand spit that projects from the south end of the Chiraya Peninsula. That's our focus. Now, we presented all kinds of evidence for this. I'm not going to go into any further detail about it, but I do want to talk about what our plan is in November, we're going to bring a small team of people to the island. We're going to be conveyed there by 2 boats, the Indy Surveyor and the MV Windward from Majuro in the Marshall Island, which is to the northwest of Nicomaroro. It's about a 6-day sail from Majuro to Nicomaroro. We plan to spend about 5 days on the island doing our work there, focusing on the Taraya object to identify it. That is the single purpose for this trip. And then we'll have a 6-day sail back, hopefully with some good news for people. Now, what we're going to do, first we're going to go to the site. We're going to do as much as we can without disturbing it, because the sediment there is very, very fine. So when you disturb the sediment, you ruin the visibility. So we're going to do non-intrusive kinds of work first. First, photography. We're going to do remote sensing, including use of magnetometers, side-scan sonar, underwater photography, overhead photography, and so forth, before we actually do anything physical. The first physical thing to do would be the use of hydroprobe, which is basically just pushing a pipe down through the sediment to physically contact any object that is covered by the sediment. We know exactly where to look now because we've got good satellite images, and when we go there, we're going to get better close-up pictures. Once we've done that, then we'll do underwater excavation using a water induction dredge. These are some of the instruments that we're talking about. There are 2 different kinds of magnetometers. One is pulled by a boat in a grid pattern across the site. The other is a handheld magnetometer. Then we have the side-scan sonar there, and then we have an underwater drone for taking photography under the water. This is the water induction dredge. It's a very simple tool. It's a pump that sucks water, and it pulls the sediment up. The sediment will go through screens, so that any artifacts that are caught by the dredge will be caught by the screens, and will be there just as a standard archaeological procedure to find any items, any artifacts of any kind that might be included. Among other things, we'll do a walkover survey of the adjacent land because it's possible that the storm or other activities have brought artifacts from the site up onto the land. We'll be sure to check that out. Then we're going to be installing some devices which will stay there after we're gone, including a webcam, a weather station, a water level transducer, and a docking drone. One of the concerns about the site and our work there and all this publicity is the security of the site. We're very much aware, and it's pointed out all the time, that somebody out there might want to go and vandalize the site, take samples of it or something. So protecting the site is critical. So we're working on accomplishing that through several different ways. One is an on-site webcam, a security cam, and a docking drone, which we can operate from a distance. So if there are intruders, we can actually launch a drone and get photographic information. I should mention also in that context that we were just there in Tarawa, capital of Kiribati, and we spoke with people at the Kiribati Maritime Police, and they have patrol vessels. They also have technology. They are able to detect any vessel which comes within their territory. They have a real-time view of every vessel that is within their territory, and if anybody comes into that territory without permission, they are able to launch their patrol boats. They can even bring into play the New Zealand Air Force to challenge any people who might want to come and do harm to the site. And then, of course, after we're done on the site, we'll be sailing back to Majuro. These are some of the items that we intend to bring there, including a Starlink setup so that we have internet, good high bandwidth internet on the island, a solar power station to power this equipment, including equipment that we're going to be working with, and equipment that we're going to leave there, which includes the security cam, the weather station, the water level transducer, and the docking drone. All of these require power. By the way, the transducer is basically to keep a record of the water levels in the lagoon, which is an important piece of data. And all this stuff, we're hopeful that we'll be able to leave there for the use of the people of Kiribati when it's no longer necessary for our project. And I should mention that we're working very closely with with Kiribati on this, and we intend for this project to be a benefit to them, not just for us. This is their country, it's their cultural and historical legacy, and we're working very closely with them. We're currently in the process of getting a permit from the Kiribati government, and we have a long-range plan and hopes to continue to work with them going forward. Now, of course, if we are successful in identifying the trial object as the Electra aircraft, we plan to come back with a full-scale excavation in the following year, in 2026. We're working with a company in Florida called Recon Offshore. Recon Offshore is a maritime archaeology firm. They've done many underwater archaeology projects, mostly shipwrecks, but also some aircraft projects. They're highly qualified for this, and they're going to be on our team doing the best underwater archaeology that can be done. And again, in 2026, a full-scale excavation. Because when we go there this year, we're going to be only uncovering enough of the object to identify it. It's doubtful we're going to be finding insignia or something that tells us, exactly what aircraft it is. But the Electra is a unique design. And I think it's clear that if we can uncover enough of the object, and it is the Electra, we'll be able to identify it based on what we see. And that's basically it. So I think that what we're going to do now, and I'm not the director here, but I think we're going to be taking questions.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that it's the Electra?
That directed to me? Well, I've been asked this question before, and I'm tempted to say 9 out of 10. Okay.
Another way to put that is in the inverse. What else could it be?
Yeah, exactly. We have pondered that question over and over again. What else could it be? The only other item that comes up is maybe an alien spacecraft.
But I don't think you mentioned, even in the course of the ensuing World War II, there are no known aircraft that went down in that area, in case you're wondering whether it's a Japanese Zero, for example.
What's the budget for an expedition like this, and how is it paid for?
That's a really good question. We've figured a budget about $900,000 for this project, and we are taking pledges and contributions from people. We've been working on this now, at least at ALI, been working on this since last summer, so we've been doing fundraising for about a year. We were successful in getting part of the pledges that we needed by early this year. We decided to go public about this in January of this year in order to spread the word wider so that we could have more success in our fundraising effort. Making a close connection with Purdue has increased our confidence that we will be able to fund this project.
So how much more money do you need to reach the goal of how much it'll cost? How much more donations do you need?
Can we answer that?
Well, go ahead.
We've come full circle in a sense because Purdue Research Foundation, of course, funded the original flight. And when we mentioned that Purdue Research Foundation has taken a leadership role in supporting ALI, it's done the same here as well. So to ensure that ALI will have the sufficient funds for the expedition, Purdue Research Foundation has authorized an extension of credit, a line of credit to ALI to draw down on in a maximum amount of $500,000. Of course, if and when those draws are needed, they'll be drawn down, but then they'll be repaid by donations at a later date. And I think it's safe to say that Purdue for Life will be assisting ALI in its fundraising efforts.
And let me just add that we are, of course, speaking with people privately, and I'm very confident that we'll be able to meet that goal.
So just one clear, $400,000 raised so far with a $500,000 line of credit to finish it for now.
Right, it's a line of credit, which we hope that we don't have to depend on.
And then that $900,000, is that just for the identification mission, or does it include the excavation? Is that a total separate?
It includes what we're doing this year only. Mm-hmm.
Would Earhart and Noonan have any reason to have hope during the 5 days they were there that help was on the way?
I think they had every reason to hope. And I think that Amelia was planning to take off again from the island. We know that there were radio transmissions from her for a period of about 4 or 5 days. She was basically sending out SOS, Mayday, somebody come help. I think she had strong hopes that would happen. Ultimately, it did, of course. A Navy plane flew over the island only 7 days after the disappearance. But by that time, the radio transmissions had stopped, and it seems likely that by that time, the aircraft was no longer functioning as, well, that is, they couldn't function to power the radio. So I think by that time, the tide had already lifted the plane off the reef, and that dashed all hopes of being able to fly away. Perhaps not all hopes that they could be rescued.
The history, I just have to say, is a relative newcomer to the hypothesis, and as a history major before I was a lawyer, the history of this is fascinating and very tragic. It's almost as if Murphy's Law prevailed throughout. If anything could go wrong in this, it did, including, by the way, the fact that the leading, sorry for the bad acronym, but the PISS, the British agency that was responsible for exploring colonization, the lead military officer, a British military officer who was responsible for leading the colonization of the island, was on the case to pursue the identification of the bones and tragically passed away from an illness, and so he wasn't able to follow up. All these records have been found later and assembled by Tiger to piece together this amazing case. The records about the bones, for example, were found in a warehouse, a British colonialization warehouse 60 miles north of London at some point in the last 20 years. In any event, and then World War II broke out, so the story kept getting, the thread kept getting lost. And to the point that Rick made, the USS Colorado had launched planes, and it was, of course, one of the most massive search and rescue missions in world history, and I can't remember how many days they attempted. But specifically, the plane from the USS Colorado reported signs of recent habitation on Nicomaroro, but then that was, again, not followed up on in the report up to his superior officer. So, again, it seems as if anything could go wrong, it did, and throughout.
You both seem so personally passionate about this. How excited are you that if, in fact, you do match and this is her plane? And how monumental is it for not just you personally to have done that, but the world to have answers?
Well, speaking personally, it's like the thrill of a lifetime. I've done many archaeological projects. This one is unique and has the most significance of any, especially in view of the worldwide popularity notoriety of Amelia Earhart and the story. I mean, when I was growing up as a kid, I knew all about this. I mean, I heard about this. She was a household name, and for good reason. So, of course, being associated with this project and having the opportunity to solve the mystery is a thrill beyond anything I might have expected in my life. So, yeah, it's a big deal. How do you feel, Steve?
Oh, yeah, I would just agree. I'm honored to be a part of this, and sort of by serendipity, my role as the lawyer, I was called upon to sort of double check the nature of Purdue's claim on the aircraft, or PRF's claim on the aircraft, over these past few years when we've gotten inquiries. That's basically how I'm involved, and was tasked with assessing Rick's project and seeing if Purdue could and should get involved. And again, so personally, on a personal level, I'm very honored to be a part of it and very fascinated, as I say. It seems like with each, including in our recent trip to Tarawa, I learned things that make me even more convinced in the validity of the theory. And again, we don't have time to go into it, but the more I think all of you would research it, you would just be utterly fascinated. We didn't mention today Betty's diary. Young 13-year-old Betty Klink, living in St. Petersburg, Florida, and operating what turned out to be a pretty powerful shortwave radio that her dad had in the suburbs of St. Petersburg. Listened for 90 minutes, I think on July 3rd or 4th, to communications, the voice of Amelia Earhart. For 90 minutes, she wrote in her diary. She used to like to listen to the hits of the day on the radio and listen to the communications. They could pick up stuff from around the world. And she was writing things down that basically no person who didn't know Amelia Earhart would have known. And that's all been sort of analyzed and pieced together. By the way, she passed away with only Tiger essentially believing her. They reported it to the Coast Guard at the time. It was dismissed. She later married, and she moved to Hoopeston, Illinois, just across the border from here, where she passed away in her 80s, with Tiger believing her. And she finally said when she was interviewed by Tiger, finally somebody's listening to me.
How confident are you that Purdue has a claim on this? I mean, the letters that are in the archives are clear that Purdue gave the money, but it was in her name that the claim was, and even then, that there were suggestions it would come back here, but never really a contract that said Purdue did.
Well, my fellow lawyers in the audience will know that there's different kinds of claims in the law, right? There's legal claims, contractual claims, there's also equitable claims. I would say Purdue has the strongest equitable claim to the remains of any other organization in the world. That's based on the clear donative intent, the clear intent of Amelia and her husband to bring the plane back to Purdue, and the fact that we facilitated it. Obviously, there are a lot of stakeholders now involved in this, not the least of which is Rick and ALI, but also the people of the Republic of Kiribati, and their views on this matter is very important. They were very friendly across the board when we met with them 3 weeks ago, and they actually studied the Amelia Earhart story in grammar school too, it turns out. They quickly realized, once they grasped what we were talking about, how important it will be for the Republic of Kiribati when all eyes of the world are on them, if indeed we make this big if, but if we make this discovery. And so they'll have a view on it, and we'll have to work with the Republic of Kiribati. But our pledge at Purdue will be, let's just say, between us and the Smithsonian, if we're able to repatriate it to the United States. We're clearly the best home. This was the original home of the Electra.
If you do get it, what, I mean, not too far ahead, but the building, you put it in here, what do you do with it?
All that kind of stuff has been discussed and will be discussed. We got to first find it and determine if it's the Electra. But I think there's a commitment from the current Purdue leadership that we would explore creating a suitable and permanent custodianship for the remains, along potentially with Rick's support, other artifacts that have been found on the island.
Would you be willing to pony up for the archaeological dig or whatever you call it, the work to bring it?
We've only gotten approval to cover and support the first phase, the identification phase, so I can't speak to that yet, Dave, but we're obviously very interested in it, and we'll see what comes of it.
All right, let me come back to Betty Klink, because I'm really excited about Betty Klink. She was a teenager. Among the things she wrote in her diary was NY, 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 quoting Amelia Earhart. When she was interviewed by Tiger about this, and they were able to successfully interview her and ask her questions about her diary, she said that was her notation for New York City, New York City, New York City. That's what she heard. Remember the boat, the freighter, that was washed up on the lagoon, or rather on the reef? At that time, the Norwich City was sitting there as an intact ship, and right on the side of the hull were the words Norwich City. Right? That was the name of the ship. We think what was happening was she was saying Norwich City, Norwich City, Norwich City, which Betty heard as New York City, New York City. I think Amelia was trying to tell people where she was.